All right, so welcome to today's session. Thanks for coming early. And I know you're all having great fun this week, and thanks again for your time today. So today we are going to talk about this topic on migration to next-gen network with an automation-first approach. So I am Akshay Kumar. I am from the CX migration team, and I'll be your presenter today. So for today's session, it's not like a typical Python 101 kind of a session where there is a specific curriculum and all that. But what we are going to see is what we have done as a best practice, what we recommend to customers from the CX migration perspective, how we take the journey towards programmability for our customers. I have tried to summarize like a week's training into a 45 minutes slides, and with plenty of demos. I hope this will be informative for you. So with that. The way it's structured is, first we are going to talk about what the target next-gen network is. Let's just create a baseline of what that network is, what are all the components, the lay of the land, how it's going to look like. And I'm going to talk about the journey of taking your network from here and how you can adopt some of those characteristics early on, plan your steps towards the migration, and possibly add some orchestration to it to make this entire thing more cohesive. So yeah, we'll get started with this. So I want to start with this brief question. Any of you recall this situation where you wanted to do the programmability, but for some reason or the other, you had to go with the CLI mode first, and then it's like something that's in the future, like the software defined and all that. I'm sure this is a typical journey that we do, but the question is, how often this transition has been completed, how successful it is. And from the experience of me working with some customers, what we see is, unfortunately, the plan was not early on, and all the automation kind of stays on the NMS layer, if I may, and not has delved deep as they would want to. This is a typical scenario, and I hope in today's discussion you'll find some tips and tricks that we often recommend to customers that you can also take back and see if that fits your needs too. So I love hiking. I have spent like few years in Denver, Colorado, and I travel to all the mountain villages in the weekend in like a small propeller plane. The one thing is, I believe it's Telluride or Durango, one of those places. They actually had a lot of tourists coming in, and they wanted to expand their airport and get a larger aircraft. So this is like a story that I could relate to for our, that's the reason I'm just bringing it up. So the way I look at a migration of a large network to this programmable thing is much like carrying a larger aircraft. So the basic thing is it's all on the ground level. It's all on the foundation, how longer the runway is, right? So the same way, we are going to see how if you plan ahead on the migration stuff, you can actually get the momentum going early on, and migrating to a software-defined network the way you want it could actually be possible. And another thing that we often kind of discuss with our customers and partners, actually within my team it often happens, is they tend to forget that a network operation is slightly different from a network migration activity. The reason is, in a network migration activity, you're kind of trying to move from one way of working with things. It has certain feature set and all that, and you want to move to something which is much more cooler and much more programmable and all that. So now you have your legs on two sides of the pond. Now, what we need to think of is we should never be limited by the tool sets or the way we operate. We have to get out of that mindset. It takes slightly different approach, getting out of the comfort zone and all that. But when we start thinking that way, we actually can achieve more. So that is something that we often struggle or try to educate. It often happens within our teams, like within the Cisco teams. We actually talk to people. It's like, hey, this is a specific tool which is great for your validation, but did you think of moving from A to B? What's going to change, and what more you can actually do? So those are all the few things that I will cover today, and how we can actually change that too. So, like I said, first let's define this beast, right? Like this next-gen network. What is there? And I'm not going to spend too much time. I know you have probably attended several DEVNET sessions. You know the concepts of programmability. So let me just quickly go over give the overview on what I feel is required, and then let's move on to the migration in the second half. When I hear of programmability, or when I hear of this journey towards programmability, I can just summarize to these three things, right? All the other jazzy stuff that's there, it ties down to these three things. That's my humble opinion. The first piece is the data model. How the data is either stored within the device or the network, or how we work with it. That's one major change that you will observe, irrespective of which platform or which solution that you work with. There is some maturity or some better way of looking at the data model itself, a hierarchical, scalable, and all those good things. We'll look at that shortly. And the other part, we call it a transport or the protocol, or how a command or a data moves between a user or your application, whichever is going to, in case of a machine to machine or all those things, how that moves from one end of this thing to the network or the device that you're controlling and operating. So that protocol is something that's drastically changing. And the third piece is what is actually moving, how it is encoded, the data format, right? That is another piece. So these three things is what is actually, as an operator, day-to-day operator, that we are going to definitely look at. So if you are trying to plan or train your teams early on, make sure that they are aware of these. And I will show some ways how we actually try to prepare ourselves too. With respect to device data, again, you all know of this. It's like we have basically two sets of data. The configurational data, which is pretty much like what you need to do kind of thing, like an instruction set that the device has or what we send to the device. It's pretty much the running configuration that we are familiar with on typical iOS XR device kind of thing. And the other set of data is what they call as a non-config or an operational data. You hear the terms used several times. This is in simple terms, it's actually all the show commands except the show run that we see, all the operational status or the device telling us what's going on, right? So this is the two sets of data that we are already familiar with. Like even from the CLI, we can work with this. And the other common debate that you actually hear from people is unstructured or the semi-structured thing, and the structured data. So unstructured or the semi-structured, probably you heard this too. It is great. It's been great for us when we are handling things one-on-one. And we have also tried making some Perl scripts, Tickle scripts, anyone? So we have done that. But what we want to do is, if programmability is going to be our end goal, how we will look at things, how we will format details, right? So that is where that structured data model is actually coming in. So these are all some common things that we observe within the data model as a characteristics. When we look at the first kind of data model for the devices, so there is basically this, the way I write, like if you have done any of these, if you have gone to any of these booths where they ask for your data and all that, the form that you fill is actually a data model too. And for the devices, there is a standard that's built by IETF. It's pretty much like a language. That's a Yang language. And if you go down this path, you typically end up in one or the other route. It's like either you're doing the open way of things, like IETF standard, ITU, and all those. And you also have this native thing, which is like the vendor-specific stuff that you often hear about. And nowadays, you are actually seeing the open thing also being part of the native also. So it's like, for instance, Cisco has this native data model for all the operating system versions like NXOS, iOS, XR. They have published, they are very aggressive in publishing it. And the last thing I heard from developers is more than 90% of that is already covered in the Yang data model. Whatever you can do with a typical CLI, you can find that in a Yang data model too. Which is a good thing, because now for us, we can move confidently without having to worry about, hey, is the feature gap there and all those things. And here, I just have two examples here. The IETF interfaces piece, this is like the IETF model, and the other part is an open config model. Similar interface configurations, and this is, of course, not the exhaustive one. There are like multiple other models too. But what I would like for us to just recall is, just look at this way the data has been defined already. They expect this data to be of a certain format. It can be a read and write, which is like the instructions that we send, or it can be a read only. This is like the operational data that I was talking about, like what the device is sharing with us. So this is a typical data model. I was just getting greedy with this, so any of you familiar with this diagram? Cool. So I work with many customers who also do ACI journey. And typically when you look at an ACI, this is like a 2 minutes on ACI, by the way. I don't know if it's possible, but I'm going to try. Because when you think of ACI, what I want to register is, ACI is nothing but, again, a data model story, right? So typically people, when they look at ACI, they look at a class architecture, which is probably like 5 decades old. But the actual fun in that ACI or the software-defined piece is how we define the network top-down. For instance, here, I have like a higher-level tenant, and I have some applications, some endpoint groups, and how these endpoints, like a web server and the database, how they talk to each other. So this is all a data model that I can already plan, and I have not talked about a single device yet. So that's the way we can prepare a data model independently and make it as an overlay on a device. So when we start, again, looking at these details as a data model journey, what I believe can happen is, instead of just creating a class architecture with a typical VLANs, maybe we can adopt some of these application level programming too, which is definitely what we need. And that should be the end goal of these kind of software-defined journey. Sorry. So we spoke about the data model. I mentioned about 3 components. The other part is the transportation or the protocol. Again, I'm pretty sure you have been beat to death with this story already, but I just want to quickly review it because this is going to be, we are going to cover it when we talk about migration. Probably, again, you're familiar with this part. Like, there is a physical device which you are already aware of. It has a bunch of features, like the iOS, XR, you name it. And we have been working with the CLI or the SNMP and all the fun stuff already. But what we are actually observing is, in all the newer operating systems, it is letting us now program that or talk to the device with a newer protocol, like netconf, or netconf is actually not new, but RESTconf and gRPCs and all that. So the advantage here is, now the device itself directly, without any intermediate controller, you are able to talk to the device in a much more intelligent fashion, so it's ready to take in commands in a programmable way. It can improve your scale, and as you can just see this layer here, the data model layer, it is actually going to make sure that the data is also formatted, it's brought to you in the right format. And the last part of the section is the encoding. Probably you heard the story in several ways, and this is how I like to narrate the story. Encoding, or the data format, or how the data moves from A to B, is kind of important in different ways, because this is how you retain that. Because when I talk about a Yang data model or a certain structure, now I need to maintain the structure when I transport from A to B kind of thing, in a crude way, right? Now, for this encoding, I just took this sample data, like an IP address, source IP, and a destination IP. When you think of the options that I have, if I think of an XML option, which is, I believe, as old as the internet itself, that encoding model, you can kind of see that this may not be accurate, but what I want to highlight here is, with the tags and all those things that a typical XML will always have, you can see that it may take up to 73 bytes. Just not bad, but it still maintains the hierarchy, and what you want to communicate, it's done. If I move down to another option like a JSON, now you can see that it's slightly better, the amount of data it actually needs. And for us as a user, it is also much more easier. So whenever you have an option between XML and a JSON, you know which one to pick, right? So that's, again, a better way of doing things. A much more convenient way, or much more efficient way, could be the YAML format, which, as you can see, just uses the indentation and all that. Doesn't need any other set of bytes or data to actually set your hierarchy. So now we saw these 3 models. Of course, just for the sake of completion, we also have the protobuf, which my programmer friends, they actually take a lot of pride, and then they explain to me like a Google thing and all that, which is great. But it's an IP datagram idea. It's nothing new. It's like, I know what serialization is, man. It's like the first few bytes are this, next few bytes are this. I get it. So it's like, that's what the protobuf is. And the cool part here is the key and value piece. I don't have to go with the dictionary each time. I know the first 5 bytes are this, or the 4 bytes are this, sorry. The next 4 bytes are this, and things like that. So that is the basic way how I can encode the data across. For the most part, where we are sending and receiving instructions, commands, and all that, or operational data, the first and second is where we pretty much see, and that's more than enough. And YAML is great for additional formatting too. The protobuf kind of thing becomes more interesting when you work with telemetry kind of data, because every byte counts when you are working with like trillion IoT devices and all that. So that's a quick sneak peek on what encoding data format is. Like I said, this is not a 101 session, and I have like 7 demos. I hope I can get through that. But this is what I wanted to just give us a quick overview. But remember this again. We saw what a data model is. That is a major thing that's changing in our next-gen network. We saw what this data format is. So for our teams to be able to go program this data model or prepare this kind of a data format, we have to start early on. And that's what I will start showing from now. So I really want to do this thing again real quick, just for the sake of completion. I just showed the screenshots and everything, but let's do this. So what I want to show here is, I have taken few examples. There is a switch, or actually this is a CSR iOS router, if you're familiar with. What I wanted to show is, real quick, NetMiko is a library within Python. It just does nothing but just doing SSH into a device, and then it's going to get me some data in a typical CLI format. So I'm going to log into the same device in the 3 different ways that we saw: NetMiko or the SSH way, and then RESTconf for the API way, and then a netconf way. And then I'm just going to retrieve the same data. It is just to give you that feel that, hey, this is possible now, kind of thing. So we are all familiar with this. It's the typical show interface. Now let me do the other part. So the next one is, I'm using an API interaction, API way of talking, the REST API. And for this, I use this library called requests within this Python. And I'm not getting into the code because this may be like very basic for you. And we can get into the code later if you have time to. Again, I'm going to talk to the exact same device. Now you can see that I'm getting the operational and the configurational data from the device, and it has the statistics there, the configuration, and you can see the key value pairs, how it's more aligned, right? Now, I don't have any other controller, nothing here, just directly talking to a device and then getting the data out of it. That's the same picture that we saw. And for the sake of completion, let me also show you netconf. Again, like I said, personally not a big fan, but hey, it's not bad at all. I know RESTconf is still in the research phase for many people, so until then, we'll work with this. So what I have done here is, I have also added a library within Python, which can convert XML to dictionary. It just converted into an ordered dictionary. So it can get very verbose. So I just took the configurational data here and just converted into this dictionary, and you can see that similar IETF, Yang, and all those data for that specific device. I just wanted to quickly show you that, hey, 3 different interfaces on the same device, it's possible. And if you are familiar with Postman, or if you're not, like if you're just starting with API, Postman is the way to go. A quick definition on Postman is, I call it a browser for APIs, just like Chrome is a browser for web resources. You can, if you have the devices which opens up the API, then Postman that's developed by Google is actually the best way to start. And if you actually get detailed with it, there are like more cool stuff you can do as a team and all those, but this is one way to do it. Here, what I have is, like, I have multiple collections of API. If you want to check out offline, I can show those things too. Like, there are APIs for almost all the Cisco devices in the recent past, in all the operating systems. So what I have here, let me actually send this query again. So this is just a RESTconf query, and it goes to this specific device in this path. The path that you see here is just to get the interface data. And you can see 200 OK here, which means things are good. And this is just my lab CSR router. Again, please observe that the hierarchy of this data is that IETF Yang, and the format in which it's written is the JSON. So that's the basic 2 things that we have to just keep in mind: the hierarchy and the format. But of course, this is all possible only in the next-gen network, right? It's not possible in the existing network. So that's what we are trying to gap. So that's what I will show you next on how we can gap that piece. All with me so far? All good? Because this is all basics, right? Now let's get to the real stuff. So what we are now going to talk about is automating a migration activity. When we talk about migration, like I said, I am from the migration team within Cisco, the CX team, and we work with customers on network infrastructure migration, collaboration. So we have multiple teams within ourselves. There are some common constructs that's often required to make sure that is successful. It starts actually way before even we think of a platform or anything. It is from the way how we observe our existing network on what we call as a discovery phase. Like, we need to know everything that's running in the network to the maximum extent possible. Like, if you think of a software-defined, a complete architectural change and all that, it actually needs us to understand the existing dependencies and to the much deeper level possible. So that is a critical thing. That is one place where automation can certainly help us. And it is not. And yeah, another dogma is like, when we think of automation and migration, most of the energy goes in the deployment because scale, deployment, automation is like 3 terms that just goes together all the time, which is great. But there are more stages to the migration itself where we often ask people to focus. And like I will show you now, it will actually help us stage things and then plan it in a much more convenient way. So it will be a natural transition, as much close as possible instead of being a completely rip-off on one side to the other. So the typical skill sets and the way we operate, everything should be a natural flow from A to B. So one part, as we discussed, is the discovery phase. And the other part where we actually ask people to focus is how you plan the network and how you plan the features and all that. And the third phase is also how you validate it. Like I said, there is A and B where they have totally different characteristics and the way they work and all that. So how you prepare the validation for those. So I don't have a silver bullet, and that's not I'm going to sell today. What I'm going to share is the best practices. So I'm going to we are going to look at I think about 7 or 8 different tools and everything that I'm going to cook around that. And that's not the limit of it. But what I would like to make sure that you take away from this session is, it is possible when you plan certain strategies and orchestrate in a certain way. And that's the right way to do it. There are no silver bullets, and I don't want to believe in that. Because every situation is unique, and we have to plan for it in a unique way. Let's start with the discover phase. I just want to spend a few more minutes here. I mentioned about discovering our network. We, of course, do that today too, and many of our customers and partners also do that. But what we often go back and educate them is, when you discover the network, please take the due diligence of representing the data in a standard format, which means even if it is a traditional network, of course, you cannot build a Yang data model right away for that, but try to get as much close as possible so that now they are able to visualize that network in a more modern fashion as it's supposed to be. So it may take some while, and I'm going to show you some shortcuts on how that can be possible, how we can actually achieve it. But keep this in the back of your mind. When you start collecting data in this format, it will automatically make sense. Hey, when I have data, my network represented in a standard format, there is more analytics I can do. There is more I can prepare as a reporting, or there is more correlation I can do instead of just keeping it in a CLI, Excel sheets, and the set of tools that we actually work with needs to actually move on so that you are actually going into that big game eventually. So for this first example, like I said, I have multiple set of tools. And for the first example, how many of you have played with NSO here? Cool. It's nothing wrong. I have 10 different tools, don't worry. So the NSO part, what I typically do is I take a tool and then I just carve out the piece that I need from it because it can do 10 different things. In NSO, one of the pieces that I like specifically is the NSO developer community, and also there are a lot of third-party softwares. They actually build this thing called the NEDs. Have you guys heard of NEDs, the network element drivers? The network element driver, actually it's pretty cool. If you remember the problem statement I have, discovering that network and getting a standard format, now these NEDs, what it's going to do is, when you actually prime a device, to be controlled by NSO, even if it is a traditional network device, like an old iOS device or any other platform, actually these network element drivers are going to help you convert that device data into a standard format. Isn't that cool? I'm going to show it to you. So that is, of course, not 100% Yang data model of an old device, but it is very close to what I need. When I'm going to prepare my configurations and when I'm going to prepare the game for the next gen software defined, I want to step up the game on the existing side too. And these are all the things that actually helps me with that. So let me actually show you this one real quick so you know where we are. Just going to pray for the demo gods here, so I hope everything goes. So what we are first going to do is, so I have a simulated device in my network, in my laptop that's running. And let's do a quick show run. It's actually a blank device. I think I just have a loopback address here. That's all. We all see this CLI. We're all very familiar with this, right? Now the next step is, I also have NSO running on my own laptop. So all the demos that I'm going to give you, it's pretty much on my laptop only. So in this piece, let's log into the CLI mode of NSO. There is, of course, some fancier other mode too, but I'm interested in the CLI mode of this. So what you see here, what I have logged into is the CLI mode. The first thing is I need to make sure that the device is actually synced up properly with my NSO, because I've been doing this demo several times. So let me just do the sync operation first. Oops. Should come result true. There you go. So now it has synced. It's one way of me making sure it's alive. For some reason, I'm missing the first character all the time. Just bear with me for a second. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to hit, when I hit enter, it's going to show the running configuration. It is going to use the NED, the network element driver, and it's going to convert that configuration into a JSON format. So this is the exact same device configuration. You can see the loopback address. That's the reason I kept it very simple, so we can quickly relate to it. So we will actually go and configure this and all those things in the later stage. But what I want to start with is, now you see that it is not impossible to do what I said. It is possible to get a traditional device, a typical iOS device, and use something like an NSO NED. I'll show more tools later too. But you have some intermediate tool which can get this converted. So you don't have to break your head building all the regex. That's the painful part. Like when we start a cool project like this, there are too many hurdles, and that's where if you go and check out these code exchanges, on all the DevNet communities here, please check out what is already done, because pretty much the problem to an extent is already built by someone, and I like carving out what I need and then building something on top of it. Never start from scratch. That's not going to be a useful investment of your time. So let's just keep moving on. Let me go back to my slides here. The first piece that we saw was representing a data in a standard model. The other part is how I plan my network, right? So how I plan the target network configuration. How many of you here have worked with or heard of Jinja YAML? Templating. Awesome. It is not the only way of templating things, but when you look at it, it is not just, so typically the place where we see Jinja and YAML being used is the people who are going to implement that, like the operational people or the people who are just going to implement, instead of using an Excel sheet or a notepad for preparing configuration, they use Jinja and YAML. YAML is just the data format that we saw. So Jinja is a config template I'm going to show you shortly. So they prepare this, and then they can generate configuration for multiple sets of devices. That is a very cool use case. But what we always recommend to people is, when they start planning for a device configuration, you start with this approach early on. The advantage of that is, now I have a vision of a network code separate and the network attributes separate. This actually helps you in a long way, because now if you are going to move to a software-defined network, I already know what my network attributes are. So it is just a matter of whether I create a Jinja or a template for a CLI or a template for what kind of APIs or XMLs or all those things. I can still work with the network attributes independently. So this thought process or this mindset actually has helped people to think, okay, now you know what, this switch, I'm just pushing a CLI configuration for interface, so maybe I can try out the API here. So it is possible, or it is easy for you to do the proof of concept of such ideas when you start working on these things early on. So it is, again, let me show you that example here. For people who have not seen Jinja YAML, here's like a quick 2 minutes for you. Jinja is just nothing but a config template. You can see that I have taken an iOS CLI here. It's exactly this like a CLI, but you can see the way I have created the variables. So I can create a separate file in a data format. This data format I have used is YAML. You can use the data format of XML, JSON, whatever you want. And you can have this data format, and then I have a small set of code I'm going to show you. It's just going to merge A and B, and then it's going to generate the config. But like I said, when you start viewing things as the network attribute as an independent entity, now instead of a CLI, maybe for some features, I can just introduce an programmable API thing and all those things, because still I know my network attributes as an independent model. So it's very important to start thinking of these things early on. Keep your network code separate and the data model separate, because if you remember the Yang model, that's the language that we'll be talking in future, and this is very useful for us to get that practice early on. So let me quickly show you this one too. Okay, let's do this. If you remember this again, a Jinja model for an iOS config. It has a bunch of variables. I want to run it and show it to you, and just not on the slide, so just bear with me on that. And this is, this actually has, for router configurations and all that, like, you would expect me to keep it clean and tidy for a presentation, but there's like too many things that we often do, and then it's always like this. And on top of this, I have a bunch of variables, right? I just, of course, this is not like the Yang model, it's not the best format, but again, I still have a separate way of carving out, this is my network variables, this is what I'm sending in OSPF, this is my interface variables and all that. Typically, people tend to have it in an Excel sheet, merge things and all those, which is a good practice, but we have to move on and then see how this data models and all those things can also help us. Let me quickly show you the Python code that's going to merge this thing together. It's actually just this few lines of code. I have like few other pieces too, but this is just a redundant piece. All you see here is I am having a template. I'm having the YAML, which is actually having the set of variables I need, and I merge. I just use this libraries YAML and Jinja, which is already there in Python, and then I merge. So just think of this few lines of code, how much time it's going to take for us to adopt in our environment, right? So these are all few practices, again, that will just step up the game for our people. Let's see. So of course, I have to run this code, otherwise it's incomplete. So what it just did was to take that configuration, the bunch of variables that we had, into the template, just merge them together, and then generated the config. Now, as you can see, I'm building the blocks already. I have a way of discovering my stuff into a standard format. And now you're already seeing that I'm using a standard format of input to generate a configuration, right? Like you're already seeing that I'm getting into a flow here. So for the next part, now we will talk about some orchestration. Now I'm going to show you what is possible if you start putting things together with some overlay like an Ansible or any other orchestrator. Because pretty much when you have a data or when you want to do things, there is always a follow-up action that you want to add on top of. And tools like Ansible is very effective in that way. And I have like 3 demos here, and if time permits, I have a few more that we can do. But let me start with the first one. Actually, this is the piece that I'm going to talk about. Like I am going to talk about a service discovery, a pre-post migration, which is like a typical checks that we always do, and also preparing a target configuration. So let's actually skip to those pieces, and then I'll explain what it is. So the first part I want to show you is the service discovery reporting. So if you remember that NSO NED thing that I discussed, where you can extract that iOS configuration into a standard format, right? Here is one more way. How many of you are familiar with PyATS? There is actually a booth here. It's called Automation Journey. I'm going to show you how cool it is, and you're going to rush to that place, trust me. So the PyATS team is actually, it's the library that's built by our Cisco folks. It covers about 1,200 show commands already, and those libraries can already get the data in the standard CLI format into this JSON format. Isn't that cool? Like you can already do that. Like you don't have to worry about this. It's already covered for you. Like 1,200 commands, you can already extract the data in a standard format. Now this guy Clay is pretty cool. Like I was chatting with him last night, and he built another version of it. So he has built an Ansible wrapper around it, and it's in the DEVNET code exchange again. So that's the reason I said just work with the DEVNET community, see what people are doing. So I knew of PyATS. I was working on something, and I went through the DEVNET community, and then I was just trying to find other people who have solved the problem. And this guy has solved the problem for some set of use cases that he liked. So I carved out, again, some part of the solution, and I was trying to build my pipeline with that. So in this case, this is all the code that it's actually there within that Ansible playbook that I have. Just a few lines of code. It actually is an Ansible module that this guy has already created, which in the underlay uses the PyATS. And it actually carves out, for instance, this is actually a show version output, a typical CLI. It parses that command into a standard format. So when you think of, if the next time when your folks are doing some kind of a regex or whatever it is for carving out output, please don't do that. Please check these things, because when you talk to these people, they have built a tool which can do something end-to-end. You may not be interested in the complete use case, but you should also think of the option that you can carve out some part of it to make something that's much more cooler for you. So let's actually get to the demo, because that's actually pretty cool. I'll come back to the slides. The first thing I want to show you is an Ansible playbook. How many of you have played with Ansible here? Cool. I'm not a veteran in Ansible either. So what you have to remember is, I am a typical networking guy. I like to talk ASICs. I like to talk on the hardware level. But I'm doing this because it doesn't take much from me, and it saves a lot of time for me. And that's what you need to just remember. Like, when you actually start doing it, it is not actually a huge ramp up. It's actually pretty easy when you start working with this. For instance, this Ansible code, I just avoided having multiple. What you can actually do is, in this case, I just have declared variables and directly copied some show run output and all those things, because I'm doing plenty of demos. I want to not risk it. But you can actually have an Ansible poll into that, like the first example we did, and get these output also. So here I have the typical show IP interface brief. This is what all we know of. And then the show interface command. So this output, and the tasks here is actually what matters. So this is what actually Clay Curtis he has actually built. So this is the parse genie thing that I talked about. And the underlay of this is the PyATS team. This is what they have done. So it's going to help me parse the show commands. Like you can see, I have a show IP interface brief parsing for that. And then another thing for the show interfaces. And let's actually run this and then see how the output looks. This is how you run an Ansible, by the way. So I write that playbook. That's actually a YAML format. And once I have these instructions, it is so in all the rest of the orchestration examples that I have, I'm going to use Ansible as the higher level thing, because it's much easier to write a playbook. And there you go. This is the file actually we saw. And I'm going to run this Ansible playbook now. This is now taking that example, and you can see this has already extracted this output for me. This is like not logging into any other device or anything, but that show commands output, that interface, and then so let me actually scroll all the way up, and then I'll walk you through this. The first part of this message is the show IP interface brief, right? So that's the typical thing that you see. And this is already built by the team. They have done this for 1,200 commands. So please make use of it. You should never be doing a regex again. Trust me. And now you can see that I have a way of extracting a typical traditional CLI into this next-gen model data format. Now again, you can see that I'm talking the new language here. So this is going to help me like do a validation or a service discovery reporting and all those, because now if you give it to a college kid or any programmer here, they can help you just crack this, because for them, they don't have to worry about the actual interface or whatever. This is a Python data model for them. They can just walk through this, and then once you have built it, that's the coolness about the structure. It's always the same. All cool? I have a couple of more demos where it's going to get a little more intense, so please stay with me. So the first example we saw was a service discovery. Now I am stepping up. I'm just building a more better pipeline. So we saw how we use NSO for extracting the data, right? So in this example, I'm going to use an NSO package within Ansible. So I'm going to first configure a device, push some configuration into it, again prime NSO to that device, extract that updated config, and I'm going to show it to you in a JSON format. So the way we use it, again, I'm building my migration pipeline, as you can recall. So the first piece is it's going to help me do a validation or just get the configuration part, a discovery phase. That was what we did earlier. And now I can push the configuration. For pushing the configuration, I can use a NetMiko or using the NSO itself, or directly Ansible also can do it. And once I have configured that device, now I'm extracting it, the configuration. That's the part that you already saw. But what I'm going to show you is the sequence of it, everything together. The top part here is actually the configuration that's already there. That's all you need. It is actually how you use an NSO package within Ansible. So this is actually Ansible playbook that you see. And this is how you use, like I said, this is all running in my own local laptop. And if you want to have a NSO version to play for yourself too, you can actually download it in DEVNET. Are you aware of it? You can actually go and download and you can play with it. There are actually some labs where you can actually learn and play with it too. So it's pretty cool. Like there are some things that you can actually play with there. So in this case, we are going to get this output, and then it's going to generate the JSON piece for you. So let me show this thing real quick. First, I need to get to the right path. So I'm actually running that playbook that I was sharing earlier. So what you see here is it's staging an iOS device, which is typically like what I wanted to start with. The first set of iOS device, the configuration that we were seeing, I'm pushing actually more configuration into it using an SSH. So this is like something that's happening in the backend. And later I'm again syncing the data. You remember how I did the sync data earlier. I'm doing it again via Ansible, via some set of instructions, extracting the data for me. And I am interested in just few part of that information. So I'm just reporting the interface data, how it's been updated, and then how the OSPF data has been updated. So this is Ansible running through entire end-to-end flow. I'm having it use multiple other tools to push the configuration, use NSO for syncing and all those. So it is like something that can make your life easier. You can plan or update each of these modules independently, have your teams work independently, and they can have the coherence. But the cool part is, as long as I maintain a standard data model, I can have independent tasks, and then I don't have to worry about the thing as a entire single beast. Are you with me so far? Are you good? Ready for more demos? Cool. So the another part is actually, this is a very unique use case that we got. Not unique, but something that we had to work with. How many of you have done an iOS to XR or an operating system to operating system conversion, like any vendor to any vendor, right? Of course, all of us have. That's a trick question. So what is actually, what we wanted to do is take a typical configuration. I had shown you enough tools now where you can extract the configurational data or an operational data in a standard format. So what we wanted to do is a pipeline end-to-end, a real quick pipeline so that can save our time. And then we were calling it zero touch, but it's not actually zero touch from a deployment perspective, but we wanted to generate this config as quickly as possible. So once we have a typical iOS configuration, I'm going to extract some bunch of data in a standard format. And then there is a target configuration. In this case, our folks were interested in XR. So they wanted to take some part of these attributes and then build an XR out of it. So that's the pipeline I'm going to show you, like taking an iOS attributes using that typical model. So how many of you have worked with a network to code? So when you are starting with the, again, that's one more, it's our part of the extended DEVNET community, N2C or the NTC or the network to code guys. They have built some text FSM templates too, not just for Cisco, but for other folks also. So we already spoke about NSO, NEDs, PyATS. I'm just giving you a lot of ammunition here to go and play with. And the network to code text FSM templates, they're all like pretty cool ways, like honorable mentions. Of course, Cisco Conf, I can never forget. That's my first confidence builder for me. So those are all like cool places where you can start practicing, and then I highly encourage you guys to start with those as your bottom layer, and then work on your applications on top of. So in this example, again, I have used a lot of these open source tools, not just one. I have used like I think 5 or 6 of them, and it will just help me extract into the JSON. I just used it because it's not like impossible to do with one, but I just like playing with more. But you can even use any of one or the more of those. Get that in a standard format, and with that standard format, you can generate the configurations too. So let me quickly do that demo here. I know we are running top of the hour, so I'll make it real quick. So these are the steps. If you're familiar with the data warehousing, I tried using the same terminologies: extraction, transformation, and loading. So we are extracting the data in a standard format, and so this is the configuration that's extracted in a standard format. You can see that it's not exactly a Yang model or anything, but this is what we can work with. The second half of it, what you see, is actually an XR format of that configuration. We wanted to use certain parameters from the original set, so it is a pipeline again, and how we can build a pipeline end to end. One more cool part is, like I said, we actually work as a team. I have like plenty of people in my team, like in Europe, US, and in the Asia Pac. We actually work together, and we work on different modules at different times. So everything that I have been showing you right now as a demo, this is actually being updated live to my team on the WebEx team space. Like every stage of it that I was showing, it's here. So they constantly know this. If there is some problem, it will call out to them, and then they will go and fix the module too. So that is like some jazzy thing that you can add on top of if you are interested and make your life interesting. So always think of how many of you have played with WebEx bots here. Please do. You'll get addicted to it. I actually use it as a party trick for my friends too, and it's actually pretty cool. Speaking of party trick, we always talk about zero touch and all that, and people don't believe us. And sometimes you have to just give them an eye opener and then say, hey, this is zero touch, right? So what I usually do is just walk away from my laptop and then say, Alexa, start migration. And it should work, sorry. Just give it a second. Yeah, it's my Bluetooth, sorry. I think it's having an interference. Okay, what should actually happen is it's, in this case, I was unable to pull it back. But let me try again. Thanks for bearing with me. Alexa, start migration. So now it's again a party trick. Not functional use. Like just think of this as a post credit to what's going to come in future. But we want to get those voice activated or zero touch and all those ideas embedded in our people's team. So the exact same code that I was writing earlier, I actually show it in this way. So that's pretty much what I had for you guys. So thanks for staying with me. I'll be hanging around here. I think I need to clean up this place for the next presenter. But again, thanks for all your time. And so this is like kind of the first time we have done a training like this sort. So if you like it, please do share the survey. Like it or don't like it, please share the survey. It will really help us and where we have to improve and all those things. So again, thank you. Thanks for your time again.